This is Fantology.
You may have heard of us.
All right, fantasy book fans, welcome back to another Fantology episode. This is your host, Stephen, along with my lifelong friend, Josh. And today we have a very special guest, one that we are very excited for. The one, the only, Brian McClellan. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yay! Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And this episode is kind of a pump up, whatever you want to call it, episode for In the Shadow of Lightning. Did I get In the Shadow of Lightning. Yes, the first book of the Glass Immortals, which is coming out on June 21st, a little more than a week, or actually less than a week as we record now. Time flies in 2022. And I just finished reading it and really liked it, Brian. So I'm excited to talk with you. This is not going to be spoilers for the book. If you're listening for the purpose of wanting to be excited for the book or just wanting to hear us chat with Brian, like you're not going to have things spoiled. We won't even do spoilers for Powder Mage. We mostly just kind of want to talk with you and figure out how your brain ticks and what makes you such a good author.
Oh, well, thank you. That's going off the high assumption that I'm a good author.
Well, after reading a few of your books, I think I can say you're one of my favorite authors, and I'm a big fantasy book fan, so that's probably not surprising.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. They keep writing me checks, so I'll take that.
So I guess rather than continue to take my word for your writing prowess, I think a lot of people are interested in the Glass Immortals. This is your new series. It's been a minute since the last Brian McClellan, since the Powder Mage wrapped up. So I think people just kind of want to hear, like, what is this new series? What can they expect? How may it be different than Powder Mage? And let's go from there.
So Glass Immortals, it takes place in a world of industrialized magic, which, people coming from Powder Mage, they're not going to be super surprised by that, because I've always loved playing with the kind of the themes of industrialization in magical worlds. So it takes place in this world in which magic is made rather than innate. And it's made in the form of these little glass baubles. A certain kind of sand is mined all over the world. And then in Glassworks, it's turned into these little baubles that you can wear on your person. And depending on the impurity put into that glass, it depends on how it changes you, what part of you it accentuates. So you have forge glass for strength and speed. You have wit glass for your mental acuity. You've got daze glass to get high. Like there's a glass for everything. And this is a world that runs on this thing, and the setting is going to be quite familiar to people from Powder Mage. It takes place in a world that equals roughly our 1800s, early 1800s, Napoleonic era. So it's still flintlock fantasy. And this world runs on God Glass. And the crux of everything is that one of our main characters is a failed prodigy. He was raised as a brilliant kid. He was a governor at 14. He was a general at 20. And then everything came crashing down. This all happens in the prologue, so this is not spoilers. Everything came crashing down. His life is destroyed. He sends himself into self-exile. And then the book begins 9 years later. He finds out that his mother has been murdered. He has to come home to the capital and take his place as head of his little tiny guild family in the cutthroat world of this big empire, and immediately finds out that the thing that got her killed is that the material to make God Glass is running out. And the whole civilization is kind of teetering on the edge of what we would kind of think of in a modern terms as an economic collapse. And a lot of people have an idea that this is going to happen, but not the public. And it makes everything very complicated. And so our hero, Demir, has to come home and take revenge for his mother's murder and try to figure out what's going on with the God Glass. And that's the crux of the book.
That was a great succinct explanation.
It's almost like you've done this before.
My elevator pitch for this book, depending on which podcast I go on, is between 20 seconds and 20 minutes. So I'm trying to find a happy medium.
I think that was great. And let me just say, when you talked about the prologue, personally, I think that this was one of the most memorable prologues I've read. I'd say maybe the most memorable since like even the Stormlight Archive prologue. It immediately introduced Demir in a very compelling way. You know, you felt like you got this insight into his life that was going to shape him and pretty much every major decision that he was going to be making in the book. And so I really appreciated that, because I feel like sometimes in books you hear about something that happened and it's hard to contextualize it or understand why it's influencing the characters to do certain things. But in this prologue, you're dropped right into this, what kind of seems like at the beginning is going to be more of a political thing, and then it turns into this kind of horrific type setting, and it was really moving. And then as you know, I progressed throughout the book, it really goes to like that does influence him and does influence a lot of his actions. So that's something I've really appreciated about the book.
Well, so the unnecessary prologue is kind of a stereotype in epic fantasy. And when I wrote that prologue, it was actually I think it might have been the very first draft of the book. And this book went through several drafts. And I sent my editor that prologue and I said, look, this is me kind of exploring some things. I don't know if I'm going to keep this or not. And it's 6,000 words long. It's a long prologue. Mm-hmm. And she came back and said, no, this is staying in. I love this. And it's one of the only pieces from the first draft that remained in the book, like almost completely whole. One of the first things I wrote to introduce this world. And I really love it.
And it's great. I mean, Demir's maybe the main character, although you do have more point of view characters. So, and maybe we can talk about them a little bit, but I think this prologue really helps to make his arc more impactful later on in the book. And there's some nice twists and reveals, and the reader maybe doesn't realize everything that actually happened in the prologue. So I think it really, sets up the action right at the beginning, and then is a driving force throughout. So I agree with your editor. I think he made a good call there.
So in terms of the magic system, it seems to be about on the same level, like maybe from this hard and soft spectrum that, we kind of like to talk about. It seems like it's about in the same range as Powder Mage. Is that kind of how you're thinking about it? Where it seems like there's maybe some more abilities that are granted than what Powder Mage had, but what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to magic systems, everybody, and it's the Brandon influence, right? Everybody talks about that sliding scale of how hard your magic system is, how soft it is, etc. And I definitely I come kind of almost literally from kind of the Brandon school of magic systems, and I like going for a harder magic system, but I don't go as hard as Brandon does. I like to keep things a little bit softer, a little bit more pliable. And with God Glass, I think that I can do that without cheating, because God Glass is something that it affects every single person a little bit differently. And there are various powers of God Glass. You can get really badly made God Glass, and that's what people that are poor use basically. And it'll give them, it'll let them carry around a sack of wheat basically, without a problem. But you've got the better stuff that the guild families have access to, and then the very best stuff that will literally kill you if you use it too much. And so I've got this kind of, within the world, there's this kind of sliding scale of how God Glass works. And that allows me to keep the magic system a little spongier, I guess you'd say. And I really like that. And it's kind of in a similar way that kind of Powder Mage was, that I treat it as the magic is a little bit different for every person. And I like doing that.
remember one of the things that Brandon talks about with magic that makes it work well is you need to have a way to make it run out, or you need to have some kind of limitation to it. And it seems like the residency in the glass is the way you're doing that. And I think, we have mentioned Brandon a lot, but I think fans of Mistborn will feel pretty at home with this magic system. There's a lot of differences and nuances, but there are also some similarities, also kind of the setting, this like pre-industrial type setting, as well as, fans of your previous books are also going to like it. So, I mean, I think if you're listening this far and you're kind of on the fence, I would say I'd recommend it. And I think that you're going to feel very, the Glass Immortals is going to feel like just kind of your next jumping off into the next McClellan adventure.
I think the biggest compliment I got from Brandon for this book was I got a text like late one night, months and months ago, basically, and he basically said, "This is, I finished your book. I really liked it. I'll blurb it." And he said, "This is your Brandonist book yet." Or he said something like that, the most Brandon feeling. And, that made me feel nice. That's a huge compliment coming from him. I like that. But yeah, you mentioned the limitations of magic. And that was something I wanted to have from the beginning. I kind of treat, you mentioned resonance, and that is how they refer to the magic. What comes off of these little pieces of God glass, they essentially have kind of micro vibrations. They kind of hum when they're touching you, and it puts off this resonance that I kind of treat like radiation in the world. And in very low doses, the kind of the lowest quality of God glass, you can wear it most of the time and you're not really going to be that affected. But when you start kind of ratcheting up the quality and the resonance, the strength of it, it's going to start to affect you. You start by getting kind of this sheen of glass rot scales. They just call it glass rot as this term for just the effects of God glass resonance. So you get this sheen of kind of fish-like scales that is the same color of whatever God glass that you're using. And those, if you're using it a little bit, those just wipe away. They fall off. It's no big deal. But if you abuse God glass, those can become very painful to remove, and then they can become permanent. And if you keep using it, you're going to get cancers that will kill you. And so it's a kind of an escalating thing that is a known part of this world. And I feel like maybe, to me, I wanted it to feel modern in the same way God glass does. It's this thing that people are using all the time. And what effects will it have on you and society and health and things like that?
How did you decide on glasses? Is there a glass blowing hobby somewhere in your life, or did you look around and try to find the most unique way to apply magic?
I've never done glass blowing. I don't think I've ever even been to like a demonstration, but I've always been fascinated by it, from the earliest days of YouTube when you could find that kind of thing. I've always loved that. I think it's really cool. And early on, like in the earliest kind of thoughts of what's my next series, I knew I wanted to do something with glass. I wasn't sure what. I played with a lot of different ideas, and the one I got the furthest with was mages who summoned demons and trapped them in glass, and then used the demons at different parts of different times, and it didn't quite vibe with my style of writing, and so I kind of moved on from that, and then I ended up with God glass. So yeah, it was a bit of a process that started with knowing I wanted to use glass somehow, and then kind of fiddling with it until it worked.
So this is another setting very similar to Powder Mage, like we said, flintlock fantasy, military fantasy, a lot of battles, a lot of similarities to what we've seen before. Is that just a place that you've landed on that you really enjoy writing? And I guess through the rest of your career? Should we expect more of the same? Are there more things that you're wanting to experiment with eventually?
I mean, it's a place I'm comfortable at the moment, and I'm at that slightly precarious place of success with my writing career where where I've done really well and I feel very confident, but I also am very aware that a big flop would totally ruin my career. And so there's some strategy in that to say, I'm going to stick with what fans know me for, at least for now. And, you know, I've branched out a little bit already. I've got my self-published urban fantasy series that I am way behind on doing the third book in. And I've got a bunch of ideas that kind of ping around in my head. I have one thing that about a year and a half ago got serious enough that I was sending drafts early, like sample chapters to my agent. And I didn't let go of it. I basically just ran out of time. I got the contract for this series, and then I needed to be writing it and working, and the book was taking a lot of iterations. And so that kind of got pushed to the side. And I have found through trial and error that I'm way more effective as a writer if I focus on one thing at a time. So yeah, I like Flintlock fantasy. It's very fun. It's what fans know me for at the moment, and so I'll stick with it at least this trilogy. We'll see how it goes forward. I don't really know. I'm very open to kind of doing whatever I'm comfortable with and what people are, you know, what publishers are willing to pay me for, right? I always, whenever I talk about this stuff, I always sound so creatively bankrupt. I love writing in this time period. It's a very interesting time period in our own history that I think is just full of cool inspiration for political intrigue and world-shaking events and changing technology and all of that stuff. And so I will probably write in this genre in some way or another for the rest of my life, but who knows what I'll fill in the other parts with.
And I really like reading it too, because, you know, whenever there's magic, you're like, well, a guy with a gun could always just come in and blow away a wizard, right? Like that's kind of a old trope about fantasy. You know, you get those kind of sketches like that. And so in both this and Powder Mage, like, yeah, some big magic users are taken down by guys with guns. So you kind of have to like get that balance of, you know, here's some amazing things you can do with magic, but at the same time, like a common foot soldier can just like, if they have a shot at the back of your head and they take it, then, you know, you could be a goner. So I think it always reads, you know, it's a compelling read and a compelling setting. I'm surprised that, you know, we don't see used a little bit more than just like the kind of sword and shield approach that most other, you know, epic fantasies take place in.
Well, I think it's I think it as a time period and as a technological period, it works with epic fantasy still, because you don't get people with automatic weapons. You don't get you don't totally destroy the kind of sense of wonder that you get from epic fantasy. You still have a flintlock. It takes a long time to reload one of those. They're finicky. They're hard to maintain. And you still have people dueling with small swords during this time period. You still have, you know, cavalry charges. You've still got a lot of things that can preserve the sense of wonder for epic fantasy while taking it into another kind of era, and it has become a genuine subgenre of epic fantasy, which is very cool to see. I kind of got in right at the forefront, but then, you know, there was guys like Django Wexler immediately after me, and since then you see a lot more authors writing in it. You see a lot more books coming out that kind of, you know, tout a flintlock fantasy, and I think that's really rad.
And yeah, like you say, it's right at the crux of a lot of you know, it's pre-information age. Obviously, there's no internet that is going to really kind of spoil the story. There's still lots of room for creativity, and you can go in so many different directions. I don't know, Josh. I maybe disagree a little bit. I feel like a lot of epic fantasy is kind of moving into urban fantasy, and there's a bit of a crossing here.
Yeah, I think you're right, but there are still a lot of series, that do focus on the pre-industrial revolution era. I'm thinking about the ones I've been reading recently, but even like I'm blanking. Evan Winter's series. I'm blanking.
The Rage of Dragons.
Rage of Dragons. Series, like that's definitely pre Flintlock. I don't know, like there's a lot of the major successes that have come out are back to pre-industrialization and pre-gunpowder days. But yeah, you're right. I do think we are creeping towards that as becoming the new standard. So,
and some have started there and then moved into this type of time period, like First Law and like what Sanderson's doing in Mistborn. And that's kind of fun too, because then you can see the same magic. Like, oh, now technology has changed, and now how do we adapt the same type of world into a new period of technology, of a new setting, but still the same setting in a different world. Have you thought about doing something like that, Brian? Moving like an existing story into the future?
There's a lot of challenges that come with that, and it's one of the smaller reasons why I broke off from Powder Mage. Like Powder Mage, I love the universe. I will probably go back to it at some point. I never discount that idea. But I did 6 books and a bunch of novellas, and I was getting a bit burnt out with the same thing. I wanted to play with something new. But there was also this idea that if I came back to my publisher and I said, hey, I want to do another trilogy in Powder Mage, there was this thing in the back of my head where I kind of knew that fans would expect the technology to advance in some way. And even though it doesn't do that really that often, I think it's happening more, but it doesn't do that often in kind of standard medieval epic fantasy. You kind of can have thousands of years of all the same tech. And I don't really want to do that. I maybe that will change in the future. There may be a point at which I say, maybe let's play with how things change once you get telegrams and all this, the changes of the kind of the age of steam and things like that. But especially at the moment when I was finishing up book 6 of Powder Mage, I definitely was not in the mood for that. And if I go back to it, it may be that I just say, yeah, I'm going to kind of stick with the feel of what it is right now. But who knows, if that's 5 or 6 years in the future Brian might have a totally different opinion on this than present day Brian.
Sounds like those darn fans are really holding you back and pushing you in creative directions you don't want to go.
No, not at all. It's a lot of times, when you're an author and you do this kind of, especially when you're a full-time author, you're in your own head all the time. And so you make assumptions a lot. You make assumptions oftentimes based on little evidence of what people expect from you. And I may have made that assumption of, because Powder Mage, the whole point of it was a new era, a new technology that was changing the way that the world worked. People would expect me to continue on that theme as I went forward. And I don't know if I care to do that at the moment.
So one question from Discord supporters on Phantology was, which character from your works do you identify with the most? Maybe your character that's easiest to write, and then which one is the hardest? And I guess we'll free you up to say you can go back to Powder Mage. You can go to, maybe we'll say anything out there, and then maybe tell us a little bit about the Glass Immortals. You've talked about Demir, but who are some of the other characters, and how do they relate to you?
I mean, you always put a tiny bit of yourself in every character, because you have to be able to, kind of have to be able to dig into their brain and figure out how they work, what makes them tick, and things like that. And even if they're like a horrible person, they may have they may have a hobby that you find interesting. There's you always put a little something. Back with Powder Mage, my self-insert character, the closest thing I would come to a self-insert character would be either Mahali or Borbador. Mahali, because he's this big jolly chef, and I like that. It's fun. I relate to that, the love of food. And Bo I always liked because he's quietly in the background. He's quietly competent. He hates himself a bit, but he's also kind of an unashamed hedonist. And there's a little bit of myself in that. But I always just kind of liked his casual ability to be reliable and to try to do good things even when he's in bad situations and even when he's expected to be a horrible person. And I always liked that. But yeah, all the characters, you put a little bit of yourself in. With the new series, with Glass Immortals, I don't think there's anyone that I would point at and say this is a self-insert character, or even close to it, But I love all of them in different ways. You have to. So we already talked a little bit about Demir. Demir, the way I write my characters with these big epic fantasies, multiple point of views, is that I always have one character that is kind of the central pivot point, and everybody else kind of revolves around that character. And in the Powder Mage, first Powder Mage series, it was Field Marshal Tomas. In the second one, it was Vlora, and in Glass Immortals, it's Demir. So Demir is kind of the central pivot point. And the other characters we meet Adrian Sapolki he's a breacher. He is the military aspect of this book. He's basically a walking tank. He wears this heavy armor made of god glass. He has a natural resistance to glass rot. And so he is able to wear god glass for far longer than normal people without getting sick. It will still make him sick eventually, but he's got a natural resistance. And so he's a military breacher, and he's basically the one who is sent to break the enemy line. If you've got two formations firing their muskets at each other, he's the guy that goes across the middle and slams into them and just starts hacking away. Adrian is he's someone who I like because he is both simple and not as simple as he seems. He is very loyal to the battalion that he works with. He works with this battalion of absolutely crazy combat engineers who are considered the elite of the elite. These are the guys that are sent into the dirtiest places to break a siege, to throw grenades at the enemy. They're nasty people, but all twisted and fun and really enjoyable to kind of play around with. And Adrian he considers himself their protector. He almost like a father figure. He's got his massive shield and he's got his massive sword, and he thinks of himself as the sword and shield of the Iron Horns, his battalion. But he also struggles with madness that he's had since he was a child, that afflicts him, and throughout the course of the book is getting a little worse and a little worse, and for reasons that we won't spoil or talk about. But he's one of those people that is both a kind of a cold, hard killer, but also almost kind of pure in the way that he considers himself. He is incorruptible. He knows that he kills people for a living, but he also considers himself a protector. And I like that kind of dichotomy when you're playing with somebody who's a soldier.
And that's really one of the themes of the book, I would say, that I picked up on, at least, is this balance between what has to be done, even if it's kind of brutal or ugly, versus how do I protect those that I love, and then how do I like live with myself as I walk this line. I thought it was really well done with him and with Demir as well, and probably with your other characters as well, now that I think about it, but I'd need a minute.
I don't know. I don't think Tessa struggles with that much. Kizzy very much struggles with that.
Yeah.
So I'll talk a little bit about Kizzy now. So Cassandra Vorsion. She is another character that she's another one of the viewpoint characters. Cassandra is a bastard from a major guild family. So Demir is the patriarch of a tiny guild family. Tiny meaning it's just him now that his mother is dead. They used to be very powerful. The family dwindled over time, and now he's basically the final scion of this small guild family. But the Vorsion are one of the 5 great guild families. Like their guild family is as powerful as the king of another country. And Kizzy is a bastard from that family. And her father is a really terrible person that is one of the 5 most powerful patriarchs in the country, in the empire. And she, because she's a bastard, she does not have all of the privileges that her full-blooded siblings have. And she's basically been relegated to the place of a favored enforcer. She's the one who is sent out to break legs when needed. And sometimes slash throats and do other nasty things, but she doesn't. It's drudge work she doesn't really like, but she kind of accepts her lot in life and realizes that, it could be worse. It could be a lot better if she wasn't a bastard, but it could be a lot worse as well. But Kizzy is also one of Demir's childhood best friends. They played together as kids. And so she's one of he goes to her family and says, hey, will you rent me one of your enforcers? I want to borrow an enforcer. And they say, oh yeah, we've got thousands, we don't really care, that's fine, you can use Kizzy. And so he goes to Kizzy and says, hey, I'd really like to recruit you to help me with these problems I'm doing. And so she gets pulled in that way. But I really like her character because she has to struggle with, she doesn't have kind of the purity that Adrian does. She is far more cloak and dagger. She, her weapon of choice is a stiletto. She's a throat slasher, and she struggles with the idea of loyalty and family and being treated like garbage by her real family, and not really, and wanting to be accepted by them, but also they kind of are all horrible to her. And so it's a very complicated place she finds herself in. And I like playing with that aspect of, that whole idea of, is blood thicker than water kind of thing, and how she deals with that. Kizzy, funny enough, was the easiest character to write for me. And I don't know what that says about me, but Kizzy was by far the easiest character for me to write. She was very fun. Every scene that I wrote of hers just kind of flew off the page for me. And then there's Tessa. Tessa is the final of our 4 point of view characters. And Tessa is she is a Selfinsert, which is basically a magical engineer. She's a glass engineer. And she makes god glass for a living. And she is in some ways a counterpoint to Demir, because we meet Demir in the prologue as somebody who is a genius. He's a political savant. He's just amazing at what he does. And then we see his fall from grace, his mental breakdown. And then we see him in chapter 1 as somebody who's drifted away from kind of their calling, their purpose. Tessa is a bit of a counterpoint for him, because Tessa is only a little bit older than he was when he had his mental breakdown. And she is a genius of a Selfinsert. She is the personal protege of one of the world's most foremost experts at making god glass, and she's kind of been groomed for this. She's been, to become this kind of to become an engineer. She knows all the ins and outs of the magic technology and how to make it and how it works. And she also has a weird quirk in that she cannot benefit from God Glass. She has something in the world called sorcery aphasia, where she can hear resonance, she can feel the resonance, which makes her very acutely, which makes her a very good Silesier, but it also means that she can't benefit from God Glass in any way. But she also can't get the negative aspects of God Glass either, which means that she can work with this material for hours on end with no problems. She can make the best quality without getting sick, which gives her a huge advantage as a Silesier. And so she kind of has this, she has a journey of basically her world being upended by the consequences of everything going on with the guild families. And at the time, at the beginning, she has no idea about any of this. She is just suddenly dumped into this conflict. And Demir has to kind of figure out who she is. And I won't get too much further into the kind of the necessities of that. But
yes.
But the two of them, by necessity, need to find each other. And that's a big driving force in the world and in this book. And I liked using her as a counterpoint to Demir because she has not lost the things that made her amazing. She also hasn't kind of lost her sense of, maybe a sense of justice and sense of personhood and all those things that used to drive Demir. And it made it, and so I'm able to kind of give Demir in some ways a mirror to look at, to say, oh my gosh, this is like somebody who is brilliant, but also they didn't fail the way I did, and to see how he deals with that.
One thing I really like about all these viewpoint characters is you really have a character that I feel like most people are going to be able to relate to, whether it's the military character or the nerdy type character or the prince. Like there's these characters that I think a lot of people can see themselves in or see aspects of themselves in and latch onto, and all of them are very compelling. I feel like I get that classic thing where I'm like, oh no, I don't want to stop reading about this character, and then I get a page into the next chapter and I'm like, oh, now I just want to keep reading about this character, and I'm upset every time that character's chapter ends. And whenever I feel that happening to me, I realize that, okay, now I know that I'm really appreciating this book, or I'm lost in it. And so I think that you've kind of struck lightning with these 4 viewpoint characters that you have in this book, at least, because they're all very compelling. And, I think I have my favorite, but I think that everybody will have a favorite. And I think that that's going to, that really comes through in their personalities and their strengths and the things that they struggle with, those characters too.
So who was your favorite? I'm curious.
I really like Tessa.
Yeah.
That's
I'm gonna say the same. She was also my favorite.
Oh, really? I'm actually really glad to hear that, because Tessa was the hardest character to write for me. With Powder Mage, as a writer, what I became good at over the course of writing Powder Mage was writing everything moving quickly and rarely stopping to explain things in long form. Obviously you have to explain this epic fantasy world as you're digging into it, but I always wanted to cut out this idea of whole chapters spent exploring a part of the world that doesn't have anything to do with the main plot. And Tessa was me trying to say, okay, I want to slow down my own writing a little bit, and I want to spend some time with world building that isn't always necessarily like punching at moving the plot forward.
Mm.
And so Tessa, being a magical engineer, gave me a chance to kind of slow down a little bit and explore how God Glass is made, and give the reader a view into not just the political intrigue and the big military battles and things like that, but kind of the quiet workshop where everything is made that drives this world. And it was quite hard for me to get in that mindset, but I'm very glad to hear that it worked for both of you.
So I mean, we're both huge nerds, so I don't think that should surprise too much.
A few things. One, I really like how I always felt like I was getting a look behind the curtain, like kind of seeing behind the scenes whenever I got a Tessa chapter. And two, these are just like high level things. The narrative that she was put into at the very beginning of the story was compelling to me. So I felt like I wanted to see what was going to happen next, along with getting those behind the curtain things. And the third is I haven't quite finished the book, but I started shipping her in my mind with another character before they met. And so that's playing out right now. And so I'm those three things together have really made me latch on to her. Anyway, there's my high level overview.
So Josh is spoiling that there may be romance in the book.
I mean, there are interactions between characters that I was looking forward to seeing. So
I will say, as you talked about, Tessa, it sounded like one thing you really wanted to accomplish was a change of pace. And comparing this to Powder Mage, I think that is the one thing that I noticed that I think was the biggest improvement for me. Powder Mage was great because it was so breakneck, like you say, and everything was always happening so quickly, and very much the same in terms of like there's always something interesting going on. But I feel like there was more time to kind of breathe a little bit, but also have the plot moving along quickly enough where it felt very compelling, but not too much so. Like it wasn't like events were just kind of contrived to say like, oh, we've got to keep the plot going, so someone's gonna bust into the room right before they start to have this important conversation. Like there wasn't that type of thing that it didn't feel believable, but there were always exciting events going on to where, like Josh said, I wanted to keep the pages turning. I wanted to see the next chapter from whatever character viewpoint it was. So I would say bravo on the pacing. That's my main thing from this book that I thought you did better on.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I always hope that I'm improving in some way when I start a new book. And I'm very proud of this book. It honestly, and I've mentioned this a few times before on other podcasts and things, but I put more work into In the Shadow of Lightning than I did on any two of the Powder Mage books. It's a book that I wanted to have the world very concrete before I finished the end of book one. One of the big things that I always kind of regretted about Powder Mage, about the beginning of Powder Mage, about Promise of Blood, was that Promise of Blood is very much it's my first book. I was like 24 when I wrote it, I think. And there is a lot of me throwing shit against the wall to see what sticks. And then I realized when I started writing Crimson Campaign, what I had done in retrospect, and realized that there was a lot of disorganization. There was a lot of things I hadn't codified very well. And going forward, I kind of had to deal with that. And that was a bit of a frustration to kind of fiddle with over the course of the next two books. With Glass Immortals, I wanted to avoid that. I wanted book one to be very concrete in my head, and I'm hoping that shows up on the page.
So at the end of the book, there's a twist, and as I was reading it, I realized things are going to be very different in the next couple books here, and so I'm glad to hear that you have sufficiently planned this out, because I feel like I can expect different things in the next two books.
I mean, I guess I won't say anything further than that.
Yeah. Probably shouldn't, but I don't think people would be surprised to hear that there's a twist at the end of at the end of the first book in a trilogy.
There often is.
Especially when you say it's the most, Sanderson said it's the most Brandon of any of your books yet.
Uh-huh.
I think that probably means that there's going to be a little bit of a twist coming.
So we're fairly into our time here, but we do have several more questions. So maybe we can try to go through a few of these and knock them out. So one question from a friend who's also publishing her first book later this year. She wants to know about your writing process. Do you have word count targets, or do you just kind of write as you see fit, and it kind of comes together at some point?
Oh, my writing process is terrible. I'm the worst person to ask this. I've always been one of those people that from early on in my career, when I went full time, I would do this thing where I would write for 6 months and then play video games for 6 months. That is very unhealthy. I do not recommend it. It is both mentally and physically very bad for you. I've been actually, this is something I've been trying to work on a lot over the last probably about 10 months or so, where I'm writing every single weekday. I'm taking weekends off without thinking about the book. But Monday through Friday, I'm working. I have the book I'm either actively typing or I'm thinking. I'm dedicating thinking time to figuring things out between 10 a.m. and about 8 p.m. I just kind of a long day, and only some of that is actually writing. But weekdays I try to have work. I try to be my work time, and then weekends take off, and it's I'm having mixed results. Get back to me in a year or two. But a process like that, I think some people nail it right from the beginning of their career, or even before their career starts. I've always struggled with process, and it's only been recently that I'm really trying to get it nailed down, and I still struggle with it. So yeah, so don't beat yourself up if you're really kind of janky with your writing and your writing time. If you can organize yourself to write in certain time periods, I mean, that's awesome. It's better than I can do.
I mean, I'm not my own boss. I'm supposed to work a job from 9 to 5 and not work weekends. And my schedule is also all over the place. So if you're your own boss and can get like an approximation of that, I'm very impressed. So, okay, another follow-up question. Well, actually not a follow-up question, but you have a podcast. You are a competitor of ours. How has that been going? What inspired that? How much of your time does that take up? Just kind of tell us about the whole situation over there.
Yeah, so I've got a podcast that I started I think it's almost exactly a year now. I wasn't even paying attention to like my anniversary, I guess. So I started a podcast. It's called Page Break with Brian McClellan, and it was influenced. I listened to a lot of. I really love British comedy, and I listen to a lot of British podcasts. I listen to podcasts where comedians will talk to other comedians about their lives, about craft, about everything that's involved in that sort of thing. And I've always really loved the idea of two people that are both professionals in a field discussing kind of inside baseball sort of stuff. And I thought, well, that could be really fun to do as an author. And I wanted to be a little wider. I always say creative professionals. 75% of my guests are authors. But I've had YouTubers on, I've had actors on, I've had agents on. But I really like the idea of that inside baseball chat. And it's not codified. I don't really even consider it a writing podcast in the way that a lot of these podcasts kind of do, like kind of what you guys do, where you're really talking about craft and digging into these things. I really like it as more of a people podcast, where you're talking about your hobbies and being frustrated by sitting at home alone all day and not being able to meet up with your colleagues at conventions because of the pandemic. You know, like I like these little slices of being a creative professional that a lot of times don't come to the forefront. And so yeah, that's kind of the idea with Page Break, and it's been fun. And I think I think next week is my 45th episode. So it's been a really good time. I'll probably, it's one of those things where, like, you know, it's still costing me money to make it, but I'm enjoying doing it. So I'll keep going for as long as I feel like it.
Yeah, when we started podcasting, there's kind of that like rush of, oh my gosh, I'm talking to another person and it's going to be recorded and put on the internet. And for some reason, this is very fun to do.
Yeah, very much so. It's, you know, there's days where I'll be like, oh, I've got an interview this afternoon. I don't want to do it. I've got too much to do. I should be writing. And then the moment I start talking to them, I forget all that and I'm having a blast. And then, you know, I'm pumped the rest of the day because I got to hang out with, you know, a friend or a colleague or somebody I'd never met before. And I always end up loving it, even on the days when I'm feeling kind of crummy.
So this kind of leads into another question, which is, how has the profession changed over the last few years? And part of it is very much inspired by the pandemic, I think, as you mentioned. And it's becoming, I guess I'm kind of answering the question myself as I ask it, but it seems like it's becoming more and more important to put a face behind the name on the book and put a personality out there, which is what you're wanting to do with your podcast. So is there anything else you'd add to that? And what do you see in the future as being really important for your success?
Man, that's hard to say because oftentimes you really can't tell what has changed until after it has changed. And I feel like we're still kind of, especially with COVID, kind of still lingering and people still, you know, hesitant about kind of getting back to conventions and doing the in-person things. You know, I did my first convention a couple of weeks ago, and I went to France and then got COVID in France and had to miss the convention, and that sucked. But like, so it's hard to say, you know. I think that it is changing in that way of you get, and you've felt this. I've felt this most of my career, where you kind of have the writers who only want to write, and they are happy to have a publisher. They are happy to not have social media, and they're happy to write and put out a book occasionally, and that's their career. And some of them make great money and are able to do that, and other people do it as a hobby. That's fine. But so you've always had that type, and then you've always had the type, at least for the course of my career, which started in 2013. You always also have the type of, oh, I'm gung-ho on social media. I'm really out there all the time. I've got regular newsletter. I've got all that stuff. And I feel like we're reaching a point where we're kind of cracking into a third type. And you see this with, actually going back to Brandon. You see this with Brandon over the last year or two, where Brandon has hired extra people, and he has really put a dedicated aspect on his social media, onto especially YouTube, onto creating a bunch of regular content with his face and him talking and him, you know, interacting with people, and you're seeing that third type of author. I think you're going to see a lot more of that, you know, and I've got a little bit of that with Page Break, and with trying to be a little bit more judicious about doing things that aren't just, you know, promo week and then I disappear for a year, right? And so I think you'll get a little bit more of that sort of thing, and it's, yeah, that's kind of a mixed bag, right? Because some people have the energy for it, and some people don't. You know, if, you know, I've got a virtual assistant who does, you know, 5 to 15 hours a week for me. And if I didn't have her helping me with lots of the little fiddly bits of kind of running things, I wouldn't be doing extra things, because I don't have the energy for all those fiddly bits. And that makes it quite difficult, because you either have to be successful enough to hire somebody to help you with things, or you have to be one of those people that is super gung-ho and able to juggle lots of little things. And most people do not fall into those two categories. So I don't know. We'll see how that changes as things progress over the next 5-10 years. And I don't know. I don't know what it'll look like in terms of, because content creation is like the king these days, right? Everybody's creating content, and authors are like the original content creators, but we do it in long form. It's something you put out a book, or maybe you're serialized, maybe you are putting out something every week or every month, but it tends to not have the immediacy of YouTube and Twitter and TikTok and things like that. So we'll see how our industry deals with that kind of stuff going forward.
So one more crystal ball question: what do you see in the fantasy landscape? Are any hot new trends that you can cue us in on?
Oh man, no, I'm not keyed in enough. I don't really read as much as I used to, not nearly as much. I tend to listen to more like podcasts, maybe some history books, things like that. So I'm not keyed in very well. So honestly, I can't help too much with that kind of thing.
So one fan that is from Ohio wants to know, why did you move from Cleveland to, were you in Cleveland before?
Yes, I was born in Cleveland.
So why did you move from Cleveland to Utah? And because he feels, I think, personally betrayed. Big fan of yours. And can we expect any other stories from other urban type locations? Will you ever revisit Ohio?
Well, I mean, I moved because we had lived near my family for 8 years, and it only seemed fair for us to move to live near my wife's family. And there's some irony there because they all then moved over the course of the last 6 years. But in terms of writing, I'm assuming they are referencing Valkyrie Collections, which is my little urban fantasy series that is set in Cleveland. And it's about a collection agency that works for the supernatural, out of Cleveland, Ohio. And I've got 2 books in the series, and I keep promising people that I'm doing more of them. Someday I actually will. It's very much on my list of things, but also it very much does not make nearly as much money for me as my powder mage or my Glass Immortals does, my epic fantasy. So it kind of has to be on the back burner while I'm paying my bills. But I very much intend to get back to that. So we'll get to see Alec in Cleveland, punching things again someday, hopefully. And I'm not sure if this will go out in time, but if there's any Clevelanders listening, I will be in Cleveland next weekend. Not this weekend, but the next one for a signing at the Mentor Barnes Noble. So
what are the dates in case this goes out at a weird time?
Oh gosh, okay. Here, I'll actually pull up a calendar really quickly and throw them out. So I'm going to be at the Utah, the Orem Barnes Noble in Utah on the 21st for my release, and then I will be at the Tattered Cover in Denver on the 24th. And on the 25th, I'll be the Mentor Barnes Noble in Ohio. So I've got a few places I'll get to visit, and then the following week on Wednesday I'll be back at the King's English in Utah.
All right, Josh, you want to ask our last question?
Yeah. So we know we're fans of your podcast, and we know that you usually like to ask what was the last meal that you had that blew you away. So we figured we'd change it up, and what's the last movie that you saw that blew you away?
Oh my goodness, last movie. So
please don't say Jurassic World.
It's even worse.
So we went to our first movie in 2.5 years. Just a couple of nights ago, we went and saw. I'm gonna get the title mixed around, but it's Everything Everywhere All the Time. Is it all at once?
I think it's all at once, right?
All at once. Yeah.
Yes.
But holy crap, that movie was bonkers. I really liked it. It was very funny, very heart-wrenching, very weird. But I felt like in all the like in a way that I really liked. So that one got a big thumbs up from me. Yeah, I was gonna try to explain it, and you can't explain that movie.
That's what I've heard.
I've had a friend try to explain it, and they ultimately arrived at the same conclusion, was that you just need to go see it.
Yeah.
I'm excited. I have it queued up on my, because I think it came out so that you can pay $20 and watch it at home, which I'm recovering from COVID, so I still have a long quarantine period, so I probably won't be able to see it in theaters while it's still in theaters. So I'm probably gonna have to shovel out the $20 to watch it at home.
I mean, nowadays that's basically the price of a movie ticket. So.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah,
there's an AMC that does $5 Tuesdays by me, so I try and hit that up sometimes. But yeah,
I will warn anyone that it is very weird, and you will spend the first 20 minutes going, I thought this was supposed to be a comedy, and then things will start to change, and then at some point you'll find yourself laughing hysterically at something ridiculous going on. And man, I really liked it, but I can't explain it.
Nice.
Well, Brian, thank you so much. This is really a treat for us, and hopefully, if you're watching it on the fence about the new series, like don't be on the fence anymore. Go check it out.
Can you give us the date that the book comes out and anywhere you can pre-order, the best place to get it?
So it is out 6 days from our recording right now, which is June 21st. And you can get it ebook, audio, hardcover. If you'd like signed hardcovers, you can go to my website and get them directly from me. Let's see, anything else that we need to tell people? So it's book 1 of Glass Immortals. It's called In the Shadow of Lightning, and it's a big honkin' fat epic fantasy. So, come in, prepared to read for a while.
It's what, 600-ish pages, if I remember right?
Yeah, it's something like that. It's my longest book to date. I think it came in at 215,000 words. And so for anybody who read Powder Mage and wants a comparison, Promise of Blood is 165. So that's it's a bit bigger, and nice fat book.
It reads fast though. It's a page turner. Yeah,
it does. Cool. Well, thanks again, Brian.
Thanks, Brian.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.